So I think there's a lot of people here who know me already, and there's subjects we're going to be talking about tonight, which all include, oh, by the way, sorry, but if you do want to take any pictures or any videos, feel free, but would you mind tagging the spiritual badass? I'm going to change that, I swear. On Instagram, and I'd be much appreciated. So some of the subjects we're going to be talking about tonight are adoption, abandonment trauma, not just abandonment trauma. I'm going to talk about other types of trauma which might be able to help you link back to a few things that you do in your lives, in your relationships, that maybe you keep repeating over and over again and you don't quite know where it's come from. But abandonment trauma links in with my personal experience from my adoption. And then we're going to go into the fun stuff, psychosis or awakening, sex, drugs and alcohol, and how maybe my experience, something happened to me about 80 years ago now, which can be compared and contrasted from a spiritual awakening to psychosis. So we're going to talk about both of those things, compare and contrast, and we're also going to talk about the path that I took and the reason why I'm glad I was guided down that path. And then we're going to get onto the better stuff, which is after I'd settled my mind and I started reading a lot of books, I started to do a lot of understanding of my own mind, reading a lot of people from past psychologists, Socrates, Plato, who helped me understand and discover why I think the way that I think, the voice in my head. Because I'm not the only one with a voice in my head. We all have a voice in our head. And it's hopefully I'm going to give you some techniques on how to manage it, number one. Number two, maybe ways to be able to help you get motivated to achieve goals. Understand fear and how it's created in the mind and why it's created in the mind. And then near the end, we're going to go on to a bit of motivational psychology, which is a similar thing to understand in the mind, ways to sort of like pick up from where we left off on some of the aspirations we may have put down in life. And I know they may seem quite sporadic, going from adoption to motivational psychology, but I'm going to do my best to make them all link together. But I want to say one thing, that today there may be things that I talk about that may change the way you look at yourself and the world around you. And if that is the case, I want people to ask me questions. So at the end, I'm going to give a bit of space for people to ask questions. And we're going to talk about fear. And there's a lot of people who find it fearful to ask questions. So I'm hoping that we can maybe open and create a space that we get loads of questions. So I can start answering the questions about what the links through this presentation. So just a quick one, we'll just go through some of the reasons why we're going through these subjects. So we're going to talk about adoption first. We're going to talk about my adoption and who abandoned me and why. And then we're going to talk about me growing up in my new family, how my environment in my new family, and then we'll eventually go on to my behaviours growing up, and we will link them back to abandonment traumas and things. So this is an important one. So how does abandonment and neglect affect the mind? Now, there's something called implicit memory. Now, implicit memory is memory that we cannot recall. Implicit memory is prevalent from the incubation period of being inside of your mother's womb, and it's prevalent throughout your entire life. But the implicit memory from the developmental years happen in your environment when you're a child, and nobody can remember what happened when there was 2, 3, 4 years old, but your body does, your brain does. Your mind would have created pathways to either defend itself against an environment, protect itself against the environment or its caregivers, or the way the environment interacted and responded with the organism. The brain would have created developmental pathways that may be having an effect on your life now as adults, that maybe in some of your behaviours now you can link back to it and go, actually I understand why that happens now and why I do it. Psychosis and awakening, like we just spoke about, was I forced into psychosis or a spiritual awakening? I don't want to talk too much about that now because it's going to be a big subject matter when we do speak about it. Now, I have my own beliefs, and they are my own beliefs and my own opinions. anything that I speak about tonight, I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm not here to say this is the way, this is the path, because this isn't what spirituality is for me. Spirituality is about finding an understanding from a broad perspective of knowledge or environments and circumstances, and extracting the parts that benefit me and may benefit other people in their lives. So we'll talk about psychosis and awakening, and we'll talk about what the difference is between them both as well. And then the fun stuff, because I'm going to do some interactive stuff with you, understanding the mind. We're going to look at ways to understand how you think and behave, and then maybe look at a new perspective towards life, because not all, but the majority of people nowadays, because of the circumstances and what we absorb through the TV, through the media, we can absorb a lot of negative, dark, bad stuff, and it can create quite a bad vision of our own lives and the lives of those around us. So maybe we can alter and change, and maybe give some tools or even plant some seeds to help create a new perspective on viewing reality and life. And then motivational psychology, confront who you are, massively important. Again, these will link back to all these through my life experience. One of the first things we have to do, and it's the hardest thing we have to do, and that's confront ourselves. Confront the things that we don't like about ourselves. And it is painful. It's a painful experience to go through, but it's also necessary for you to grow. And growth isn't painless. Growth is painful at times. And then finally, you'll see it when you believe it. I'm going to try and hopefully give you guys the mindset that I've used in my life to go from, oh my God, I don't believe it, it's not going to happen to me, and then completely and continually manifesting an experience that relates to that mindset. Oh, I need this, I need that, I don't believe it'll happen, it never happens to me. And then it's quite profound and magical to say this, but most of the time you'll find that you will create that in your reality, because it's how you view the world. So we're going to try and change the narrative to you'll see it when you believe it. So we're going to try and adopt a mindset of what if it goes right, you know, and we're going to talk about a few ways that maybe we can adapt some motivational psychology to be able to talk to ourselves in a better way, to again view life better and create opportunities, because they're always there, but sometimes we're just blind to them. So without further ado, we're going to go deep first. We're going to dig deep into the mud, and we're going to start talking about my adoption. So I was adopted around 2-3 years old. Now, I'm going to initially I'm going to tell you about the story about who abandoned me and why. So before I was adopted, I was with a lady called Tracy Eden and my dad called Mark Eden. Now, Tracy was a prolific drug user, alcohol user, and when I was actually born, I had to be weaned off amphetamines because she was an addict while I was in the incubation period. Now, since I've had the social services adoption papers, I've read many things that are profoundly shocking back then, but now I've took them as necessary for what's happened through my life. But she used to neglect me, she used to leave me in day-old nappies, but back in them days, the social services didn't take children off parents as easily as they take children off parents nowadays. And one day, my biological father, Mark, left Tracy because he was a promiscuous man, and he went dating a lady called Eileen Roberts. Now, he broke away from Eileen Roberts and wanted to go back to my mum. So he was at home one day, and Eileen Roberts came to his house, knocked on his door, and she had a sling on. And she said to my dad, Mark, I've hurt my arm at work, I've taken a day off, I want to come speak to you, will you take me back? My biological father, Mark, was refusing, no, I'm not going to take you back. And when he showed her the door and turned his back, she pulled a kitchen knife out of the sling and stabbed him in his back and pierced his heart and killed him. It was devastating to Tracy because Tracy had attachment issues through the drugs and through her own experiences of growing up, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So she went through a very dark time, and obviously I was very, very young, 3 years old at that time, or maybe 2 years old because I was adopted around 3. And she took me to a hotel room in Gloucestershire to go to a festival. Now she left me inside the hotel room, went to the festival, took a load of drugs, hallucinogenic drugs from what I've been told, went back to the hotel room, and she set the hotel room on fire with me inside of it and left. Now, there's stories I'm going to tell you about Tracy later on, and she was very necessary in my life, even though it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound that way now. There's a lot of things that Tracy has done, good or bad, but have helped me now because of the way I view myself and the world around me. So eventually, well, I was immediately, should we say, taken off Tracy, and I was put into foster care. And I was with, from what I gather, very, very, very much because of the documentation that I've seen and the photo album of like a little instruction manual that was given to my mum and dad that stated when I liked my breakfast, when I liked my dinner, what I liked for breakfast. So my foster parents were lovely people. I'm going to talk to you about my brother as well. So where did I go? So my brother Paul was adopted from the same foster family, but was adopted into my mum and dad's family before I was. So I think maybe a year or so later, Paul had been with mum and dad. That mum and dad had a phone call, I believe, from the social services, and they said, "Look, we've got a young boy here. We're struggling to find him a place. He got on really well with this other child that you've got, that you've now adopted. Would you consider having another child?" And to my utmost joyous explanation in my life, I was adopted by the most amazing people on the planet. And we're going to go into a little bit more about what happened to me when I was sort of growing up at mum and dad's. Now, when I entered my mum and dad, I want to speak about this before I go on to anything else, have been amazing to me, have done nothing but give their all every single step of the way, even when I have given them every reason on this planet to give up. But at the beginning, I came into their family and they already had a small boy called Paul. Now, I shared the same birthday as Paul. Do you know what I mean? We weren't even biological brothers, but we shared the same birthday. It's a big coincidence, I know. So I come into this household where this young boy had been neglected from his family, is now getting love from his mum and his dad. And dad had a big family and my mum had a big family, so there was always around giving Paul this attention and stuff. And I came in and I stole that. And all of a sudden you can imagine a 4 or 5-year-old boy who's been neglected, which we're going to talk about the trauma, what happens to a young child when they're neglected. But I've came in and now I've taken his spot. I'm now, the attention's now on me, and not only that, I'm taking his Christmases, I'm taking his toys, I'm taking his birthdays, and I'm taking everything off him. So my brother ended up becoming extremely violent towards me, and I, in turn, became violent towards my brother. Now, my dad was a working man. He's always been a working man his entire life. He owned a business called Clydesdale Engineering. He's been nothing but a breadwinner for our family. But my mum was at home, and I believe my mum and dad had an expectation of having a family and having children to be this beautiful experience. Having 2 children, 2 sons, all these pictures and all these families who you see portray this loving, caring life. And all of a sudden, my mum is left at home left at home most days, even when my dad worked weekends, with 2 boys who wanted to quite literally eradicate each other off the face of the earth just to get the attention that we needed from our parents. Because I'm going to talk again about implicit memory a little bit later on, but because of the memory that we cannot recall and the environment we was in at 1-2 year old and in our incubation period of neglect, we formed neurological pathways that it's a hard world to get affection. If you're crying and you're upset, you're going to have to fight for it. all of a sudden I'm fighting for it again. Not because of my mum and dad, because my mum wanted to give me everything. And me and Paul were fighting every day. My mum no longer became a mother to us. Well, she was a mother to us first and foremost, but she became this security lady for years and years and years, trying to stop us from fighting. I still have scars on my body from mine and Paul's fights when we were young kids. So again, I'm fighting for love and affection. I was fighting this young boy who, at the time, I didn't understand why he was wanting to be aggressive towards me and why we was fighting each other. But eventually, as we'll talk a little bit later on, I'll be able to explain why. So, who was I growing up? So eventually, I obviously went to school, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I keep looking at my mum just to nod and just to tell me the stories. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first day or the first week of school I got sent home for hitting somebody with a plastic pole. Michael Campbell, I think his name was, poor kid. I was very aggressive. I was fighting everybody again. Went into secondary school. At around 12, 13 years old, I started smoking marijuana really heavily. And when I say smoking it heavily, I mean I was smoking cigarettes as well at the time. And I got that dependent on marijuana that every time I wanted to have a cigarette and the nicotine hit, I thought, I'll just make a joint because I get my nicotine and I get my weed. So I was smoking a lot of marijuana and I was becoming extremely paranoid. But I figured something out when I was a teenager. I figured out that if I was bad, and I was naughty, and I was destructive, I got attention. And I got it, and it was devoted to me. I wasn't fighting for it with Paul anymore, it was devoted to me. And it wasn't just devoted to me by my parents, it was devoted to me by other parents who were saying to their children, don't hang around with that boy, Kyle Walker. And at that time, to me, that was because of my ego, I was building my ego through those years of my life. It solidified my ego and made me fight further, take more drugs. I was bringing the police home most weeks. I was bringing trouble to the house. We had cars set on fire outside of our house. We lived in a village. And we had cars set on fire outside of the house. I was arrested on the front of Cleethorpes front for running down the street with a BB gun by the police. But one of the main things was my violence. I was so violent to everyone and I didn't understand why. Now, there were people when I was younger, including my parents, but there was other people as well, and a couple of them are sat in here tonight, who used to look at me and say, Kyle, why do you keep doing this? We see someone different inside of you, like, why do you keep doing it? And at the time I'd be like, yeah, I know, I'm sorry, I want to make a change. And I just couldn't break through what was happening to me. It was like I was automatically just reacting and responding in these violent and grotesque and destructive ways. And I had no idea why. But eventually, which we'll again go on to a little bit later on, the person who they was referring to is the man who stood here now, because he was always there. But he was just covered by the trauma and by the wiring of my own mind and the responses and the reactions I had adapted to and developed to try and keep me safe in what was deemed a real bad environment at that time. So my mum and dad took me and Paul all around the world. My dad, they gave us everything we possibly could. And when I was about 15 years old, I got to a point where I'd done too much. I felt like I'd done too much to go back and I'd done too much to go on. So I was crying for help at that time. And rightfully so, my parents turned around to me and said, Kyle, we've heard it all before. Because they'd heard it so many times, and I'd be good for like a week. I'd wear a mask for like a week and I'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna be good. I'll do this, and I'd last it for a week, and then something would make me react and respond again, and all of a sudden I'd be violent and this grotesque, uncontrollable animal. So eventually it got really bad for me, and I was smoking so much marijuana and I was getting so paranoid. I didn't know what else to do, and before I did what I'm about to speak about, I started cutting my arms at school. Now, I used to cut my arms at school with a razor blade, a blade from a sharpener. And I didn't realise it at the time, but now reflecting back, what that used to do to me was help me release pain. It made me feel something, it made me feel pain. And at that time, I felt like it was helping me. On reflection, it was helping me release like anguish and frustration. And it may have seemed to a lot of people that it was a cry for an attention, and maybe it was a cry for attention also because of the adaptations I'd created from my childhood experiences. But eventually, Mum and Dad had literally wiped the hands off me. I was still living in the house, they were still feeding me, they were still taking me on holiday. But when I said to Mum and Dad, I want to do something with my life, they didn't believe me. And who would? If anybody told you that story, no one would believe a child like that was going to do something with themselves. So it continued to get worse and worse, and then I adopted this behaviour of, this belief system of, well, I'm never going to amount to anything anyway, so F everyone. I'm not going to do anything with my life, so I'll just continue doing this because I'm receiving at least some kind of attention. But anyway, one day it got that bad, and I went downstairs, and I can't believe I did this to my mother. I went downstairs and I got a kitchen knife, and I didn't far off put the kitchen knife through my arm. And it was that bad, and I run upstairs crying, and imagine a mother who all she's wanted to do was love and care and nurture her child, seeing me in that state. From that, my dad ended up giving me a job, because I think that's when everybody started to realise, including myself, like, it's either I get someone helps me, even though they'd tried and tried and tried before. This was my last chance saloon. It was if it doesn't happen now, I'm going to end up removing myself from this earth. So he gave me a job, and they did great things for me and my dad throughout my life, but then I grew older and it got worse. So eventually, when I got older, we're going to go on to the abandonment trauma and why my behaviour happened the way it did through the stories I've just spoken to you about now, and then obviously later on into my life in my early 20s, mid-20s. So the stories I've just spoken to you about, one of the most important things that maybe some of us could maybe pull some information from ourselves to our own behaviours is our implicit memory, which I've spoken about at the beginning. So again, implicit memory is the memory that you can't recall. It's there. Your body keeps the score. Your body knows. Your subconscious knows. If I asked you what you had for dinner last Thursday, you won't be able to tell me. It's buried in your implicit memory, but there might be something that could trigger that memory for it to come into fruition and for you to be able to give the answer. But implicit memory forms the basis of our developmental psychology from our environment. There's a lot on attachment theory, which we'll talk about in a moment. So implicit memory is the memories that you can't recall. And why is it so important? There are things that happen to everybody in their lives at a young age, from the years between 1 and 4. There are things that happen to you, even if you was in a stable environment. There are things that happen to you which have had an effect on how you behave now. And a lot of the behaviours that we have now, that we don't understand why we do it. Why am I procrastinating? Why do I procrastinate? I don't know. Why am I very bad in road rage? Why am I very bad in these certain circumstances? Why do I push people away when I get into a relationship? It's all implicit memories, because through your experiences, but it's memory that you can't recall, so you can't put a finger on it. You don't understand why you're doing it. So implicit memory has a massive effect on attachment styles. We only did this last semester, didn't we? So attachment styles, there's loads of different types of attachment styles. I'm going to go to my computer now so I don't get any of them wrong. So attachment styles are what we create from our environment from when we were children. So when we are children and we are in our environment, and our implicit memory is creating in the pathways, the developmental pathways of the brain to help us in our environment, we form things like dismissive avoidant attachments, which these are people who prefer to distance themselves from others to maintain independence. We have anxious attachment, which is people who are unsettled when alone and dislike personal intimacy. And there's a few others, but what I found out my attachment style was a fearful avoidant style, and I want to talk to you about it a little bit. So we talked about my past and what happened to me, and my implicit memory why I maybe acted the way that I acted. So the fearful avoidant attachment style. So people with this style of attachment have a strong desire for close relationships. They have a strong desire for close relationships, but distrust others and fear intimacy. What a conundrum. What a conundrum. We long for close relationships, but we distrust everybody and we fear intimacy, but we want it so bad. And this creates like push and pull relationships when we get older. So attachment styles, it's really good to maybe, there are some quizzes online which will tell you your attachment styles, and it's a good place to start when it comes down to figuring out why you maybe are the way you are in not just romantic relationships, but personal relationships with friends and family and such. There might be things that may be being dysfunctional in your life, in your relationships. And once you learn what your attachment style is, there are so many online materials and other sources to be able to help yourself sort of like navigate through those attachment styles. So living with trauma, we're going to try and link everything together a little bit now. So living with trauma, again, things happen to you when you were children, which have an effect on how you are now as a person. Implicit memory is one of the key ones. I know there's a lot of argument of genetic makeups and stuff. Now, I think there are a couple of psychologists in here, so if I am wrong, please raise your hand and tell me. But I believe that from what I've read, that attachment styles and environment can switch on genes or excite and inhibit genes. So for an example, if you have taken on some form of excessive compulsive gene, or some kind of addiction, which is like an excessive compulsive gene, it can be turned on and off or excited or inhibited by environment. So if you're predisposed to be an addict and you hang around people who take drugs, you're probably going to turn that gene on and you're going to adapt that behavior in your life. Something I'm going to talk about now, but I'm going to talk about later on. Most of this it's hard to explain this, but it isn't your fault. You didn't choose your environment. You didn't choose your incubation. You didn't choose who gave birth to you. You didn't choose your circumstances. In fact, you was a baby who couldn't walk, talk, and it was just developing and adapting to its environment. So it's really, really important to understand that, number one, that it's not your fault. But there are a lot of arguments between genes, predisposed genes, and attachment theories. I think it'll be quite nice that one day, I think slowly but surely, they are being linked together and they are becoming compatible in the understanding that, in fact, genes can be switched on. Predisposed genes can be switched on or switched off due to environment. Attachment theory generally turns around and says a human's behaviour is dependent on a child's environment, which makes sense to most people, to everybody. There's a lot of things that you can look in your environment and say, well, that makes sense because I act this certain way. Or there's a saying, your vibe attracts your tribe. If you are a certain persona, you'll find the close people around you are similar to you. That's your environment. That's the environment playing through your character and attracting likewise characters into your life. So living with trauma, well, first and foremost, it's not your fault, and that's one of the first things I had to figure out when I was going through my when I was going through my awakening, which we're going to go on to in a minute, which is very, like I say, it's very profound. This is a fun bit, isn't it? Depression, sex, drugs, and alcohol. So this is what happened to me when I was living with trauma. I had to escape my own mind. I hated the way I spoke to myself. I hated my life. I'd given up. I was going nowhere. I was going from home to home, sofa surfing, taking drugs. I ended up taking steroids, going to the gym, getting big, and my ego just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, my ego, which again we're going to speak about a little bit later, was protecting me, or it seemed it was protecting me from a destructive, frightening, turbulent, unloving environment. So I ended up taking steroids, taking drugs, and I wanted to be the man. I wanted to fight people. I wanted to be known to be the tough one. And it's like somewhat that my soul had created this character to protect this small little boy from what it deemed to be a very unloving and dysfunctional world. So I'm going to talk to you about a tipping point now. So we've spoken a little bit about me growing up, and I'd like to talk to you about the tipping point now. And this is quite a disturbing story. It's a disturbing story. So I met Tracy when I was 18 years old, my biological mother. Now, I was taking a lot of drugs at the time, ecstasy, I was on the hard stuff then. The only things I never took was like heroin and such forth, but I was on ecstasy, MDMA, and I was taking them regularly. When I met Tracy, Tracy was still taking drugs. She was in her 40s, and the first day we met together, we took drugs. We took some ecstasy. The first night we drank loads of beer and took ecstasy in a restaurant. And I thought that was amazing. I thought that was incredible. I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for my entire life. I've been looking for my mother, and look, man, she's literally, now when I look back at it, she's justifying my behaviour. Like, I'm okay, there's no wrong with me. If my mum's doing it, I can do it. So I was continually using drugs, and I went in and out of Tracy's life for the next 5 years till I reached to the age of 20, until I got to the age of 25. I remember on my 25th birthday, she got me a birthday card, and inside the birthday card was 5 grams of cocaine. And at the time, I remember when she gave me it and I opened it, we was laughing. And at the time, again, this character I'd created thought that this woman was some incredible version of me, which was just justifying everything that I was doing in my life. So we laughed about it, and we took this cocaine. And that night we was going to a party, which was my birthday party. And we went to a friend's house, and Tracy came with us. And then we took a lot of ecstasy on top of that. Now, we all ended up going back to my flat, and everyone started dispersing. It was early hours of the morning, and Tracy wanted to stay. I was like, yeah, of course you can stay. And it's a chance for me to ask questions, which let me just say that I did ask a lot of questions leading up to that point, but Tracy was very, very good at telling lies. I asked her a lot about my adoption and why it happened, and I was never met with a straight answer, or it would always be something different. But anyway, we was at my house, and we'd taken some ecstasy, and we sat down, and I thought, this is great, man, I'm just gonna have a chat with what I called her at the time Tracy, but she was my biological mother. And while my adopted parents was at home crying, wondering where I was, if I was dead or alive. And anyway, we sat there talking, and she made a sexual pass at me when I was 25 years old. And at the time, I had to reaffirm what was happening. So when she did it, I was like, oh my God, what was that? Like, I stood up and I stepped away, and I was a bit shook up, and my brain couldn't quite compute what was happening. And I remember her saying, no, sit down, don't relax, just relax. And she said to me, it's not like I'm your mother, I've not been in your life. And then she did it again. And without further ado, I carted that woman outside of my flat as quick as I could. I didn't even order a taxi, and I just hauled her outside. And I've never seen her since. From that point, my brain could never understand what love was, even though people tried to show me it. I could never accept it because of my implicit memory didn't understand it, because the love that I was shown as a child, my caregivers showed me love in the form of neglect. So when people tried to show me love, I just didn't understand it. I pushed it away. I kept it away from me. So I spiraled further and further into horrendous drug use, and I ended up working on the doors in Lincoln. I ended up selling drugs, and it was getting worse and worse. And every single day I was getting up and I just wanted to die. Honestly, if I didn't have my son, because I had my son at that time, not at my house obviously, we were separated from his mother. But every day I was waking up, and if it wasn't for my son, I wouldn't be stood here now talking to you. But during that time, that was my tipping point. And I got to a point where I didn't trust anybody. I didn't trust anybody around me. I didn't trust the relationships. I didn't trust people when they come into my life and they told me that they wanted to help me, even though there were so many people who wanted to, including my parents who just kept trying and trying and trying. I just completely had an obtuse refusal to keep everybody away from me. And I continued doing what I knew best, and that was fighting, taking drugs, and being the big man. I'd created, again, this character to protect me from my environment, from the times I can't even remember, and going through the times that I could remember. So then something happened to me, maybe a year after that. I did a year at my worst, ultimate gutter, every single day wanted to kill myself. I couldn't find anything in life that I wanted to do. And I woke up one day and I remember sitting on the edge of my friend's bed, rocking backwards and forward with my head in my hands, crying. And my friends had seen that every day. Do you know what I mean? They generally thought, oh, Kyle's in a bad place again. But all of a sudden, something happened to me. And I can't even put it into descriptive words, but I'm going to try to explain it through this section. So I was rocking backwards and forwards, and my friends were asking me what was wrong. And all I could say was, I don't know what's happened to me, but everything looks so differently. Like, everything visually looks different. Everything sounds different. Everything smells different. Something's happened to me. Now, for the first few weeks, this happened to me instantly. And for the first few days, it was still me being uncontrollably upset, wondering what's going on in my mind. I had no idea. I got to a point where I thought to myself, right, I need to ring the hospital here, and I need to go get myself checked out because there's something wrong with my brain. But something deep inside of me was saying, hold on, keep going, I've got you. So I kept going, and for a few weeks I kept trying to settle into what was going on. And it's like, I will say it this way, it's like I'd woken up from something. And it's the only way I can describe it. It's like I'd woken up from something, and all of a sudden I was not in control still, but I was suddenly observant of this character and these egos that I'd created. Like something had broken through. Maybe that small child that the people in the village used to see and say, Kyle, we know there's someone good inside of you. Maybe he was coming through. So I'm going to talk to you about this dark entity. Now, during this period of time, I started reading a lot of books. And I don't know why, because I'd never read books before, but all of a sudden something in my mind was saying, pick up books, man, start reading. So I was reading books, and I'll talk to you about some books later on that have helped me tremendously. The dark entity, I'm going to tell you a story now. My son's mum was buying a car for the first time, and this was maybe 4 months after I'd had this initial breakthrough, and I was settling into it a little bit. But I was telling everyone about it, and a lot of people were like, oh my God, this is great, Kyle. And a lot of people were going, oh, what's this? And I remember cut a long story short, she was buying a car, and she paid a deposit for this car, and the car wasn't the car that it was meant to be, and it was this guy in Bradford, and he stood there and he said, no, you're not having your money, you're not having your deposit back. And I stood in front of him, and I closed my eyes, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm meditating. And he went, why? And I said, for your safety. For your safety. And during that time, that was the first time in my life where all of a sudden that violent person was detached from me. And I was stood there meditating, going, I'm doing this for your safety. Now, I tell you as clear as I can that I felt a presence in my ear saying everything that I'd used to have said. Don't you be weak, as if you're going to allow this man to mug you off. What are you doing? Why is he still stood there? Why is he not asleep on the floor? And I remember keeping my eyes shut going, and in my mind I was going, I don't need you anymore. Just stay back, just stay away. And I'm fighting with this separate part of me. And anyway, it carried on a little bit, and he was like, no, I'm not giving you your money back. And I shut my eyes again, and he said, what are you doing? Why do you keep doing it? I'm like, trust me, mate, this is for your safety. And I ended up turning around to Laura, my son's mum, and saying, Laura, ring the police. And she was like, why? I said, for everybody's safety. Because I didn't want to say this, but at the time, I was fighting the biggest battle I've ever thought in my life, and that was against this character, this big, dark, horrible, monstrous, egotistical character. Anyway, cut a long story short, I just said that twice, I've drawn it out a bit, and we was on the way home, and I remember crying, and I remember Laura knows me very well, and I remember Laura looking at me crying, and I looked at Laura and I was crying, and she went, "It's true, innit?" She went, "What you've been explaining to me, what is it then, Kyle?" And I was like, "I don't know what's happened to me, but I've separated from this thing, this character which deemed he was like, which made me believe he was protecting me, and I just don't feel like I need him anymore." So there was that experience, and there was many other experiences after that, which I do believe the universe was putting in front of me to test me, to make sure that it was all legit. And I think during that time, during this, through these stages of awakening, which I'd like to call them, I had many tests, and the tests always took me a little bit further into my old ways, but then there was very easy to observe, and I'd withdraw. So instead of before going all the way in like a bull in a china shop and reacting and responding, I started to be able to go so far and then start withdrawing, because I realised that it wasn't the character that once would push forward was no longer needed, because I could achieve a different result by being calm, complacent, being compassionate, which we'll talk about again a little bit later on. So I'm going to talk about awakening or psychosis. So I believe I had a spiritual awakening. Now I've read more books since then, and now I'm at university. There are a lot of diagnostic criteria which would point exactly to the idea that if I'd have gone to a doctor, they'd have diagnosed me with psychosis, with schizophrenia. If I'd explained to them the stories that I'd explained to you, like how I've just explained to you, that it said that I had psychosis or schizophrenia or something similar, or maybe both, which isn't a very good combination, as you can probably imagine. Now, I believe that if I had gone to the hospital, do you remember when I said I was at the edge of the bed and I nearly rang the hospital? I believe if I'd have gone to the hospital and been diagnosed with a mental illness, I believe I would have been prescribed pharmaceutical drugs that would have locked me in to this place where I didn't understand, and it was scary, because when it happened to me it was frightening, and I believe I would have been given pharmaceutical drugs which would have locked me through there, locked me into that environment, into that thought process. Thankfully at the time I was reading a lot of books, and I was reading a lot about spirituality, which made me go down the spiritual route, and thank God I did, because every single spiritual teaching I read that was explaining what was happening to me was saying things along the lines of, "Don't worry, it's got ya. You are actually blessed to be going through this experience." And I just stuck with it, and I stuck with it, and I stuck with it. And I come out the other side by taking this spiritual route. I believe this is another talk and another debate, I would say, but I do believe that if I had been diagnosed with psychosis, I would still probably be in a hospital now, being fed pharmaceutical drugs to nullify these symptoms which was happening to me, which was this breakthrough that happened in my life. So the transition was very, very slow and steady. It took time. It didn't happen overnight. People say, "What, Kyle, you woke up and all of a sudden everything was brilliant?" I was like, no, when I woke up, I just could observe all the bad stuff now. I could see it for why it was happening. When I started reading about implicit memory, when I started reading about attachment theory, everything started making sense. I was neglected at a young age. My parents tried to do everything for me, but I pushed them away due to my implicit memory and my neurological development of my caregiving environment. When I was crying and when I was asking for help as a child and asking for food by crying at my most vulnerable time in my life, I was neglected. Of course, this character was created. And I look back in my life now and I don't have any regrets, because I am so grateful for him. I am so grateful for how he helped me through those times. Even though he left the trail of destruction behind him, I am so grateful for him, because without him, I wouldn't be stood here now. So we're going to go on to we're going to talk about recovery, the recovery of the true self, the transition period and the recovery. So when we talk about recovery, if you say you've recovered something, we're implying that we have recovered something. So that implies we've found something that we've lost. Yeah? So when we recover something, it implies that we've found something that we've lost. And this is why a lot of people use escapism, because they are lost in jobs that they don't like, in environments that they don't like, in relationships that they don't like. We use escapism, and I'm not just talking about drugs and alcohol as escapism. Weekend binge drinking can be seen as escapism, which is an alcoholism or an addiction. And a lot of people nowadays can escape a working week in a job that they don't like with drinking heavily at the weekend to repeat the same week again. This is escapism. This is trauma. You are putting your body, your soul through trauma. You are doing something that your body and your soul doesn't want to do. So recovery is about finding something. Now, through my awakening, I believe I recovered myself. I recovered that young boy that everybody could see and used to say to me, Kyle, there's someone inside you, man. We know there's someone good inside of you. This is who I recovered. And again, recovery implies that we've lost something. So if you are going through anything in your life and you find yourself in a state of recovery, all I believe, in my opinion, you need to recover is yourself, your true self. We talked about trauma earlier on, and I want to talk about another trauma called enmeshment trauma quickly before we go into understanding the mind. So when we've talked about implicit memory, I know we've gone into a lot of detail about things today, but enmeshment trauma is is an extremely common trauma that a lot of people have and don't know they have it. Enmeshment trauma is when caregivers, parents, inadvertently impose their unfinished business, their unfinished goals and aspirations in life, and they impose them on their children. This is enmeshment trauma. What a child will do to please its caregiver is abandon its own sense of self to make the caregiver, the parent, happy. Enmeshment trauma, it's so common. Parents do this to their children all the time. They impose the failures of their own lives on their children, and they always want their children to do better than they did or pursue a certain goal on a certain route. That child, growing up through its developmental years, will completely abandon its sense of self to please its caregivers. It's detrimental. It's detrimental to you as a person, and it's very, very difficult because most parents do it to some degree, including myself. I just want the best for my son. But it's detrimental to human beings because as soon as you abandon your sense of self, trust me, you're going down a road of addiction, escapism. It could be gambling, it could be anything. You're trying to escape a life that wasn't designed for you as an individual, for your individuality. So we'll go on to some happy stuff now. Way, yes, please. I took you down a little bit of a roller coaster. We'll go on to some happier stuff, I promise. So I was talking to you about it's all going to make sense, I hope. So I was talking to you earlier about some books that we was reading. Now, this is the first book I picked up from Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now. Now, I won't go into it massively, but The Power of Now is so important, and it's the first book I picked up through my transition stage. Now, in a nutshell, the power of now, the only thing that exists is now, and not then, or that then, or this then, or that sentence a minute ago, or even the beginning of this sentence, beginning of this speech. That's not now, and neither is now what now was just there. You get it, right? So the power of now, now is a continual and instantaneous experience. Sometimes we get so caught up in our own minds, we lay in bed at night time and we wonder what we did last week, last month, last year. We beat ourselves up. We can't sleep at night because it's so hard to go through and replay the memories of the past. We think about the future too much. We should think about the future, but we think about the future too much. We have a lot of fear of the future. We have a lot of uncertainty is a psychological stressor for the brain because it hates not knowing. So the future, again, we lay in bed at night and we worry about our future. And every single time, I'm going to say a saying actually, the mind is like a phantom. It'll always take you away into the past or the future, but it'll never keep you here. So when you're laid in bed at night time, this is what I did. So one of the first things I started doing was laying in bed at night time, and when I had a bad thought about something in the past or something that I kept replaying over in my mind, the first thing I said to myself in my head is, what was that circumstance trying to teach me? That's it. And if it goes back and replays, Kyle, what was that circumstance trying to teach me? I will find the answer, because you will replay it till you find the answer. I promise you, when you found the answer, you'll never think about it again. And if you ever go into that circumstance again in your life, you will find and have different tools to be able to adapt and change the outcome, because you have now found the solution to the problem instead of laying in bed at night time and worrying about a thought, because that's all it is a thought. And it's a thought about something that doesn't physically exist anymore. It exists in the mind as a thought, and it replays the information to your brain, and your brain releases the same chemicals, and it can somewhat, even in some severe cases like PTSD, can make you not far off relive that experience laid in a bed or in a pub or walking down the street. That's how powerful your brain is. Change the narrative. What is that trying to teach me? And I promise you, these replaying repetitive thoughts will slow down and stop. That brings me to thoughts. So what are thoughts? What are thoughts? Thoughts are ideas. Thoughts are ideas that we've taken on as truth. When we talk to ourselves in a certain way, we talk to ourselves in accordance with the ideas that we have taken on as truth. I don't look very good. I'm not very successful. I'm not doing the right things in my life. I'm not pursuing the right things. There's so many different kinds of negative thoughts that we have. I want to talk about negative thoughts, but they're all an idea. The only reason you believe a square is because when you was a child, you put a square in a little square hole and your parents went square, and the teacher went square, so a square's a square. I mean, these kind of things help us navigate through reality, and we need these things. Like money, we all have the same idea that if I pass you a piece of paper, that has some form of value. We even sell our lives for it, but that's another story. Anyway, a thought is an idea. You can change, again, the narrative. So I'm going to do something with you now, an interactive thing, really simple. I want to ask you a question. Put your hand up if you believe you are the recipient of thoughts. Do you believe you just receive thoughts? Thoughts just come. So you sit there and then a thought arises, yeah? Thought arises. We are not the recipient of thought, we are the creator of thought, and I'm going to show you how. When I raise my hand, really simply, I want you to say hello in your head. Just hello in your head, not out loud, in your mind. Say hello. Hello. Anyway, I'm going to do it again. This time I want you to scream hello as loud as you can in your head. Scream it, not out loud, I know it's coming. When I raise my hand next, I want you to scream as loud as you can in your head, hello, and I want you to scream it. And if you don't think you're screaming loud enough, scream it louder. 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 Everyone's like, "Rah!" That's the voice. That's the voice you listen to every single day. That's the voice that you listen to in the morning that tells you ain't confident, or you don't look a certain way, or you're not motivated, or you can't be bothered, or you're tired, or today's going to go really slow. I tell you, you're talking your day into existence in your own mind. If you get up every day and you go, oh, I can't be bothered, I'm tired, I've got so much to do, you know what kind of day's going to come in? You're going to have a really slow day. Time's going to go slow because you are literally speaking or theorizing your day into existence. So the same day is going to happen. If I wake up in the morning and go, I am tired, but you know what? I'm going to be productive today. Look at yourself in the mirror and change the narrative. You've simply just said hello in your head. I'm going to put my hand up now, and I want you to say in your head, I am loved. I am kind. Say these things, change the narrative, and you'll change the way that you view the world, I promise you. Individualization. This is a really good speech, a very good speech. I'm not going to give you another speech. This one's going on a little long, isn't it? There's a very good saying by Ernest Holmes from a book called The Science of the Mind, called individualization. And we're going to go on to, in a minute, why I believe everything is necessary, my own personal belief. Why must man suffer on the road to self-discovery? He must suffer not because pain is a necessity, but because he must have had experience in order to become individualized. So let me expand on that. We'll start the opposite way. Without hate, you would never understand what love is. It's impossible to conceptualize its opposite. If I snap my fingers now and you just arrived on this earth and I said to explain to me what compassion is, you don't know. You need its opposite. Explain to me what hot is, you'd need its opposite. Experience creates the individual. Now, if you can navigate through life and then navigate through your own mind and unpick the things that have happened to you in your past, may they be small or may they be big, if you can start unpicking it, you can start using this to create the individual that you should be, the true self which we've been speaking about. If you start unpicking your past, start unpicking your thoughts when you're laid in bed at night, we can start creating the individuals that we was yearning to be as children when we used to look at the stars and wonder why they exist, and look at colours and they used to seem more vibrant. And as we seem to get older, things seem to get a little bit more duller, and we seem to be a lot more distracted by other things. Expectations, this is a brilliant one. People are destroyed by their own expectations. If I expect someone to act a certain way, my partner, or my boss, or my lecturer, or my mother, or my friend, if I have expectations in my own mind, I create a narrative. And when those expectations aren't met, I beat myself up and beat the person up, not physically, hopefully, who was not adhering to my expectations. I'm trying to solidify something that I cannot control. Other people's actions are completely out of my control. The circumstance that's in front of me right now, all of you, whatever you do right now is out of my control. How I react and respond in this environment is in my control. So I get to choose, I get to pick the narrative. I get to choose if I'm in a bad environment and I can alter my reactions and responses, I'm gonna permeate better results than what I did before if I do not react, if I stop reacting in an unconscious manner. And when I mean unconscious manner, I mean by just allowing thoughts and allowing feelings to just come through. It's not an easy feat, this. But if we start going through things, understanding about the power of now, understanding about thought, understanding about how we become individualized and our experiences in our life, why we act the way we act now as adults. When you start unpicking this stuff, I promise you, what is beneath is absolutely magnificent. Last one, I think, on this one, fear. What's fear? Fear is again a creation of the mind. We think about something that hasn't even happened yet. We talked about the past, present, and future. Fear is generally, most of the time, a projection of the mind's idea, the mind creating an experience, creating a scenario that hasn't happened yet, and it's picking out everything that could possibly go wrong, and it stops you doing it. And I mean, it stops you chasing goals, chasing dreams, chasing jobs, chasing the boyfriend or the girlfriend that you're after. It's like a block. It's like going up to a skydive and standing on the edge, and you get this overwhelming sense of fear, and your mind starts saying to you and telling you all these things that could possibly go wrong. And it stops you from jumping. It stops you from pursuing those dreams, those aspirations. So what we do is we step back and we go back into safety. But we don't like it here. There's no growth here. So what we do in my life, as soon as I feel fear, that's exactly when I jump. Before I even allow it to consume me, as soon as I feel it, that's exactly when I jump. I don't mean, there is common sense here, ladies and gentlemen. Like, don't go do silly things and go jump out of planes without parachutes and such. But there is ways. Take care, Simon, mate. There is ways and ways you can change and talk to fear the way you've just said hello in your mind now. When you feel this overwhelming sense of emotion, talk to it. Why am I scared? It's not happened yet. What if it went right? What about if I did pursue that job? What about if I did pursue opening that career, opening that business? What if it went right? Be careful though, because the people you hang around with, if they're not good for you, they will also impose their own fear on you and their own limitations. So be careful and mindful who you put in your close proximity. If you're around the wrong people, they will stunt your growth. I promise they will stunt your growth. You need to remove yourself most immediately from these types of people if you want to grow yourself. So the last slide you'll be glad to know. And then we've got a little video at the end, which is beautiful. Might make me cry, the video, because every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, it melts me. Everything's been necessary. Everything in my life has been necessary. My adoption, my pain, my anguish, my circumstance. Because without my experience and without my trauma and without my awakening and without me unpicking my experiences and my thoughts and my reactions and responses, I would not be stood here now in front of you as a student at university studying psychology, pursuing his careers and dreams if it hadn't been necessary. It's all been ultimately necessary, so long as I can view it in a positive light, and again, going back to look at anything that unfolds in my mind now and look back and say, what is that trying to teach me? And trust me, it gets less and less and less the more you do it, because you start unpicking everything. And once it starts getting unpicked, you start floating through life going, things aren't that bad. I'm not too bad. You get that better. These guys are like really clicking onto this. Things aren't too bad. Another one, confront who you are. Very, very dangerous thing. Not dangerous in the pretense of physical immediate danger. Dangerous in the fact that you are really seriously going to confront some parts about you that you really do dislike, and it is going to be ugly. It is not going to be pretty. But until you confront and stand and look at yourself in the mirror and confront the things you do not like about yourself, because there are things that you do not like about yourself. If you do not stand and confront them, they will continually confront and consume you. Confront who you are. That's one of the big things that you need to do as well. What I believe people could do to help themselves progress towards becoming a very competent, physically and mentally competent, be able to attain the dreams and aspirations that they want to achieve. And the video at the end of this speech, which is going to be in the next 5 minutes, is going to link that together beautifully. Because when we do find the courage to break away from our darkness and we find some form of beauty in the world, we inadvertently give other people permission to do the same. We inadvertently give other people permission to do the same. I love this bit. You'll see it when you believe it. We was talking about earlier, we was talking about thought processes and such forth. And we'll go back to it, but we'll hit it short. We won't hit it with anything too big now. But if you believe that you aren't good enough, or you are not confident, or you are not happy, you will manifest that in your mind, in your reality. It will become what you see. If you don't believe you are capable of achieving things, you will not achieve them. It is impossible to achieve them until you arrive there in the mind first. Dead simple. Affirmations in the morning when you say you're going to have a bad day. I've spoke to you all about it already today. Change the narrative. If you want to change one of the narratives to look at yourself in the mirror and go, I am confident, whether just for a moment you don't believe it, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. I promise you, you'll start standing there, you'll start straightening your shoulders, you'll start standing taller. And this isn't something that just happens overnight. Be consistent. Training the mind is the same way as training the body. Every single day, look in the morning. If you don't feel like you're a confident person and you're not a confident person, start by doing that. And I can guarantee you after a few weeks, an opportunity will be presented to you where it's time for you to be confident, and all of a sudden you'll be like, I'm confident. Or I'm a little bit confident, let me try it. I'll let go of fear and I'll try something. Oh my God, I've got a different result. I've just opened the door, man. That's never happened to me before. You're unpicking who you are. You're unpicking your mind. The big ball of water. I love this. There's been a lot of magical stuff I've been speaking about tonight. And I've been speaking about a lot of thought process and a lot of things that may seem a little bit woo-woo. But listen here. We live on a big ball of water filled with fire. Tell me when I'm wrong. Suspended in space, spinning on an axis around a big ball of fire in an ever-expanding space. It's magical. It's quite literally mind-blowing. You cannot even conceptualize that or put that into descriptive words of how incredibly powerful that is. And I don't care what anybody thinks about themselves. Whatever made this big ball of water made you. You came out of it. If I threw a pot of ink at this white wall here, we'll talk about the Big Bang, and all the little droplets of ink on the outskirts of the big bit in the middle, that's what we think we are as individuals. We think we're this insignificant little speck on the middle of nothing. Those little specks on the outside of that, what you would decipher as the Big Bang from that ink hitting that wall, those little specks are still the Big Bang. They are still it. They have literally came out of it. You are that. You are so much more than what you believe yourself to be. So who am I? A crazy bald tattoo man who's been chatting to you about loads of crazy stuff tonight. That's going to make you go home and lay in bed and go, oh my God, what am I doing with myself? So who am I? First and foremost, I am all my experiences. Secondly, inside of my body, I have billions upon billions of living bacteria keeping me alive. I have a heart in my chest beating without a contract. I've tried it bad before. I've tried to break it, but it keeps me here every single day. I have a digestive system, a breathing system that keeps me alive, oxygenating my body to keep me here. The complexity to my body and my organism is astounding, just as astounding as the big ball of water that we live on. I am the same as you, perfect. Not an idea of perfect. I am perfect. Every single thing in my body is like an ecosystem, just like this big spinning ball of water, keeping us all here. You are it. You are the same thing. You came out of it the same way, and you are the same thing, and you are connected to it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much. I'm really grateful for you coming down. If there is any questions, please ask away. And if there's not, thank you very much for attending. It's been beautiful. Really grateful. Any questions? No? Thank you, I've got one. Yes?
I'd just like to, first of all, thank you, because it's been truly inspirational.
Thank you.
Thank everyone in this room for attending, because it really means a lot to attend this together, because the question of the unconscious I and the ego and the self is of utmost importance to everyone across the world as is awakening.
Yeah.
The process of awakening, the process of enlightenment. I mean, the Buddha once said everybody shares the seed of enlightenment within them. Mm-hmm. And I believe that. It's helped me. In some ways, it could help you. And I'm not even going to begin to go through the process because it's up to you. I'm not even going to talk about it because it's your presentation. Yeah. But it's up to you. And
well, I think that seed is in everybody. Now, there's something that I like to call the original mind, which I believe is that seed. Now, if you think about a tree, for an example, now a seed is no bigger than my thumbnail, is it? Yet encoded in that seed is everything that seed needs to know to become a mighty oak tree to provide shelter for 20, 30 people. The seed hasn't learned anything. It hasn't been influenced by anything. It's just simply grown into everything that it was encoded to be in the first place. And I believe as children, we have that innate individualization and uniqueness about ourselves, which personally, again, my own beliefs, society and the education system completely and utterly remove that from children. And as parents ourselves as well, we can, again, inadvertently impose our own unachieved desire, our own unachieved drives and everything onto our children. So I do believe that seed, the Buddha sees it as the seed, and it can be seen and viewed from different perspectives, but for me, it's fundamentally the same thing. It's that you, encoded in you, like a seed, is everything that you need to know to become everything that you need to be. It's about unpicking all the outside noise, all the blockages that you've absorbed from outside experience. So thank you, mate. Thank you for that question. Any more questions?
So obviously you mentioned about your awakening.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for someone who hasn't been through that moment, so who wants to kind of take control of their past and their future now?
Yeah.
Who hasn't had that shining moment of right, okay, things are going to change now?
Yeah. Of course. Well, for me, this is, again, only my personal beliefs. What I say is it doesn't mean that it's true and it's right for everybody. Now, when I had my experience, I wasn't asking for it at all. It literally happened. I wasn't asking for it. But the stuff that I've read about spiritual awakenings this far, there are different types of spiritual awakenings. So there are near-death experiences, which would promote a instantaneous awakening, which I believe I had, but in the deepest, darkest places. There are gradual awakenings. There are also taught awakenings. So the first thing that I would personally do if I was in that position is I'd start reading books that link ideas to my life and moving towards awakening. There's a book by Stephen Taylor called The Leap. It's a big ass book, but it's got so many, there's about 16 chapters in it, quite big chapters, but each chapter talks about different types of awakenings and ways you can invoke awakenings without having to push yourself into involuntary pain and suffering. Do you know what I mean? No, I don't know. It depends. I think spiritual is a very broad perspective. I think as soon as people mention the word spiritual, people get scared because they go, oh my God, he's religious, which I'm not, far from it. Spiritual is a very broad perspective. For me, I've read a lot about religion. There are some stuff in Christianity, there's some stuff in Buddhism, there's some stuff in many religions that I've read and I've gone, that sounds brilliant. I can adopt that in my life and that helps me in my life. By following an ideology, for me, restricts me to one way, and if that thing doesn't happen, I start causing myself more turmoil. It's like shutting my eyes and going, I'm trying to meditate, I'm not meditating because I'm talking. No, breathe this way, Carl, no, close your eyes. You're not doing it right. There's not just one way. Does that make sense? And we lose our way sometimes by trying to follow the way that has been taught to us, or we've found the way. I think some of the best thing, maybe the best advice I could do is read that book, read similar books, but also don't look for it, it'll come. And I think it'll come a lot quicker by not looking for it than by trying to look for it in somewhere that maybe someone's told you it's going to be, because it's probably not going to be there. But it'll come. I promise you it'll come. It'll come. I think a lot of people will, slowly but surely. I think we're moving towards. I don't believe we're moving towards a grand awakening per se, but I believe as a culture we are moving towards an understanding. Listen, years and years and years ago, the slave trade, we used to burn witches at the stake. We used to feed lions to Christians to lions at the Colosseums. We used to take our children to see women get stoned who had abortions. All these horrific times, there's always been a point where collectively as a human race, we've gone, hold on a minute. No, there's not. We shouldn't be doing that, should we? Do you know what I mean? And there's been a conscious shift to a collective shift of that's not right. And we've adapted and we've changed our culture and we've done this for thousands of years and we've done it over and over again. And I think it's extremely naive for people to think that we're not moving towards that place again. Because as these things have unfolded, the people at power, shall we say, or who create these forms of separation and control have had to do it more slyly and more quietly to put it under our noses, push someone back an inch, let them forget about it, push them back an inch, let them forget about it, push them back an inch, keep pushing them back. Eventually I'm studying going, wow, how have I got this far back? And the system itself goes, well, you let me do it, mate. But there's always going to be a point where people go, and it's happened, like I've just stated, in those few cases, the slave trade, the burning witches at the stake, there is always a time. And if you want to call that a collective spiritual awakening, you can. I think it's a collective conscious shift where people go, we shouldn't be doing that. And we're moving towards it. You look at all the collective stuff that's happening as a human race now, as we are, as a people. We're so separated from each other, it's unreal. But I do, and I have to have that faith, because if I didn't, I'd drive myself insane. If I didn't have that faith, I'd be in the pub every weekend with my mates, talking about how bad everything is and how bad life is, because that's where people who believe everything is bad tend to go. I have faith through studying history and studying psychology that we are moving towards a point where everyone's going to go, hold on a minute, probably not what we should be doing, and there should be a shift, hopefully. Thank you. Yes?
Hello, thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you.
Very emotive at points as well.
Thank you. I don't know, yes, thank you, emotive, I'll take that. Yeah, I don't want to upset anybody, but...
I just wanted to ask, as soon as now you've gone through this experience, you feel more awake and more in touch with your own thoughts, and you've obviously learned a huge amount. Do you think it's important to give it away?
Share it. Yes.
You're sharing it tonight.
Yes. Yeah, I believe that's my purpose in life. I don't believe it's everyone's purpose. I don't. But I found a way to transmute my trauma into something beneficial for me. Not only for me, because it's been so beneficial for my life, but all of a sudden I'd like to class myself as a really good father. And most importantly, one of the biggest things, I'd like to class myself as a really good son that my parents deserved from me when I was a young boy. So yes, I do believe that there are people in life who are going to go through these experiences where not much need to go share it. But again, like that video stated, you will inadvertently start giving the people around you permission to do the same, to let go of things and that don't serve us anymore. And that is still doing just the same thing as what I'm doing now, but just in your own small way, and that's just just a bit quieter. And you're still doing it, but that's how powerful you are as an individual, because you, again, inadvertently give people permission to do the same. So never underestimate your own personal growth, because your own personal growth will light the way for those around you. All right, cheers, no problem. Any more questions? We're good? We've got one.
Right. Just a quick one. How would you say you'd have an understanding of getting to the point where you believe you should be, and when do you know that you've achieved it?
Okay, I think I understand that question. Just say the question again, please.
Okay, so how do you understand when you're going through the journey emotionally within yourself and your own self-belief, how do you actually realise when you've got to the point of being where you want to be?
Joy and happiness. Joy and happiness. Find a way. I found a way to go back and unpick my life and take myself back to a child and go, what did I enjoy when I was a kid? Before I was told to do this, before I was told to do that. So I started looking at, I was an engineer for my dad for many years because he used to love building stuff, making stuff, mending stuff, and it was probably, I'm not going to say the happiest time of my life because I love what I'm doing now, and obviously everything's linked on to me being here today doing what I'm doing now. But at that time, it's about stripping, going back to that original mind, I believe, that I was speaking about a moment with this gentleman. Go back to what made you happy as a child before your parents pushed their own, imposed their own unwanted, like unachieved, the stuff that they didn't achieve onto you, or things that maybe you're doing just because you believe that it's the right thing to do for society. I want to be a doctor because I want to help people, and my parents have told me I need to be a doctor. Strip all that back, strip the noise back, and go, what makes me really wake up every day and smile, and then turn that into a career. Do you know what I mean? I know it sounds easy, but I know it sounds very simplistic, but it is quite simple. Look at yourself every day, write a journal, what makes me happy, start writing to yourself. A good thing that I did was I started a journal, and I was writing as if I was writing to the old me, giving me advice. And it was really powerful for me personally. I don't know if it's something you'd want to adopt yourself, but I was writing advice to myself, and all of a sudden, all this advice, I was going, well, I can do that now. So I started doing the stuff that I was giving myself advice for, and it's a really good tool to do, so maybe that'll help. But if you find joy and happiness in it, pursue it, like aim at it single-mindedly, and forget everything else. And forget everybody else's limitations and fear of, oh God, I don't think you should be doing that. You need to keep your security. You need to do this. That's their limitations because they don't believe that they could do it. You do. So just aim at it single-mindedly. All right. Any more?
I kind of think I have a question.
Okay.
Obviously, I've spoken to you about other stuff like,
Yeah.
previously on things. So, I do suffer terribly with depression, anxiety.
Yeah.
But I've only realised, this is part of my awakening, that I've suffered with depression for a lot longer than I ever thought I did.
Yeah.
So I did lose a lot of escapism. So through my teenage years, I never really knew who I was. I had really low self-esteem. I was a very late developer. I wasn't quite, the same as my friends. Kind of realised now that I am more neurodiverse than I thought I was. Funny that. And then obviously through my cancer diagnosis at 32, kind of a bit of a shock, wasn't genetic, just a bit of a habit. And I dealt with it, but then it wasn't until after all my treatment that I kind of fell apart. And it wasn't until then that I realised that my depression had actually been from when I was about sort of 13. And I'd sort of kept it all until my 30s. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And then I've sort of realised, hang on a minute, I'm not happy, I'm stressed out to the max, I'm not doing what I want to be doing, which brought me here. So pleased to meet you.
Well, you too.
And it sort of ended up in the same space, and I'm now doing exactly what you said. I'm doing a job that makes me smile every day. I'm a support worker now for people with special needs. I absolutely love my job. Depression, anxiety to the side. I go to work. Work is my therapy.
Sometimes people are depressed and anxious for so long that they don't. It's all they know. They don't realise they've got it because that's just their reality.
I didn't realise until that sort of I broke down in my oncologist's room, and then it's almost like, oh, we'll allow you to be depressed because you've had cancer, so that's normal. I was like, no, I was depressed before cancer.
Yeah, I mean, my own interpretation of depression, and again, I might be wrong. I'm not saying that I'm right here, but this is my own opinion, beliefs on depression, is when we suppress our true self, when we suppress and compartmentalise our souls to try and pursue other people's fucking ideas.
Oh, absolutely.
Some other people's ideas, and the soul becomes depressed. It needs deep rest, depressed. Now, I'm not a doctor, of course, but that's my belief on depression. So I hope that helps a little bit. But well done for achieving and getting where you are now. I'll give you a little high five, mate. Good stuff. Any more? Brilliant. All right. Oh yeah, go on. Yeah. We've got more. Don't you worry.
I'd love to just open up a dialogue with you about not viewing the ego as an enemy but a teacher. in a sense. So when you're meditating and you feel like you're locked in a dark room with a maniac, and
Yeah.
the ego, in a sense, is calling you to become present because you've realised that you're not present. So how would you explain the exact present moment now, as Eckhart Tolle would put it? How would you put that into a process of words?
Well, I think there's more than the ego. So there's the ID, the self, and the ego, isn't there? So I think sometimes they can go into battle with one another. I don't know if anyone's read The Chimp Paradox, brilliant book. That talks about the separation of the three, and sometimes we can go into like internal confrontation about which one wants to be in charge depending on which environment we're in. And the ego, for some reason, as we all know, thinks it's right, so it'll always try and take charge. I don't believe that the ego would ever bring forth presence, personally. I think ego always seeks externally for acceptance and for external stimuli to justify its existence. I believe maybe the self, that gets depressed in circumstances, would draw forth an acquisition of presence to bring you back to the centre, without being an ego and without being an ID, if that makes sense. But they're separate, for me, they're separate things. And again, they can have internal confrontation depending on what circumstance you're in. And yeah, it's up to you whether which takes charge. Question? Yeah.
You talk about finding the books. Did you have a guide or someone that was helping you source or find these books? And then also, do you feel as part of your purpose now, being a narrator, not a narrator, an orator,
Yeah.
providing a platform, being a bit of a voice for people, would you provide a platform for sharing such lists or resources or tools? Is that something that you're
Yeah, definitely.
thinking about?
Yeah, definitely. Going back to your original question, may you just ask it again, the guide that I had.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, now looking back on, my mum's going to think I'm insane. So I'm not I'm not religious, as we know, so I don't believe there's a magical man in the sky who guides me. But I do believe if I ask questions, the universe will show me the way. And things come in, because I feel like when I'm present, when I'm here now and not in the mind, I can ask a question, like, it can be something simple. It could be like, what opportunities do I need to seek next to pursue what I need to pursue? And I might just be on a train and there might be someone might have left a book in front of me. It might be something, it might be a song, it might be a person who I have an interaction with that will say things. Like Dan, who's doing the media tonight, told me about a book. And I was like, oh my God, I need to read that. Because I know that there will be something in that book that will develop me as a person to achieve what I want to achieve. Because I feel very consciously present in the now. And so long as I'm here, not there, here, and not there, but here, try and grab it. As long as I can stay here, which is possible, I can see things clear. I clear the mind. And your second question was, would I share things? Yes, I would. I think, again, Dan's been a gentleman tonight to come down to do the media and to do the filming. And we're going to have a conversation next week about maybe setting up a website and other pieces. This fundamentally was me initially. I was doing talks last year before COVID, but there wasn't as well structured as this one, I'd like to think, if it went all right. It wasn't as well structured as this one, and I wanted to start to become, I have my own goals as academically, so I have my own different goals academically, but along the side my academic goals, I wholeheartedly will continue to pursue talking to people, helping people, well, trying to help people. Again, my way might not be the right way, but just giving people alternative solutions to problems. And if I can do that and I can help change, be a light for somebody else in their life, and they go on to be a light for other people in their lives, then my job here, when I finally depart, my job here is done. and I'm happy with that. So yes, I would be looking at doing it. So if you keep into contact, I'll point you in the direction of the books, or drop me a message and I'll give you my top 3. If you say, Kyle, I'm looking at thinking about thought, expectation, this, I'll send you 3 books to read, or something, or a book just to start with, just anything. All right, no problem.
Do you not have a reference list at the bottom?
I'll get shot for this. When she told, she'll be like, Kyle, where was the reference in cited?
I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
I just
No, it's all right. There was a few quotes in there from Ernest Holmes and a few other people, but yeah, no, you're not getting a reference list. I'm joking. Everybody, I am going to go down to, I'll have a chat with everyone now if anyone wants to come say hello to me afterwards. If you've got a picture, I'd love to have a picture of you. If you'd love to post it on, that's going to change the spiritual badass. I will change that. But if you post it on these things, that'll be brilliant. And I'm going to go to the Stag's Head and I'm going to have a Coca-Cola, and I would invite anybody who has the time, I know we've been here a while, to come sit and join me and just have a general chat. It doesn't have to be about what's happened tonight. It can be about what's happened here tonight. It can be about nothing or everything. But if you'd like to, I'm going to head to the Stag's Head and just have a chat and just open a space for people to come and chill and talk. But ladies and gentlemen, she asked me not to point her out, so I'm not going to point her out. But I wouldn't be here today without my mother, a woman who I gave every single opportunity on the planet to give up on me and quit on me, day after day, year after year, for a long time, when she deserved a family that she truly wanted. I'd really like us to put our hands together for my mum. Thank you, that's it, done. Thank you. Cheers.